What's up, guys? Welcome to a new episode of the Young Guns podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the Battle of Florida. This is the third time in the last couple of years that these teams will face off against each other. The Florida Panthers haven't had the best luck, losing the first time in 6 games, and then after the second time being swept by the Tampa Bay Lightning. So Tampa historically have been the better team, but with their amazing and unexpected playoff run to the finals last year, the Florida Panthers um, are probably the favorites heading into this matchup. Also, winning the Atlantic Division, finishing first this season ahead of the likes of Toronto, Boston, and Tampa. So it's definitely going to be different. We're seeing a little bit of a weaker Tampa Bay team, but we can never count them out because Tampa is Tampa, right? This is a team that has been to the finals 3 consecutive years, winning 2 times. Last year, they unfortunately got eliminated in the first round by Toronto, but a lot of people could blame that on you know reoccurring injuries that a lot of players were not able to heal from the past 3 years. When you're playing in the finals 3 consecutive years, there's not really a lot of time to rest, right? You have to gear up for the next upcoming season. So, getting eliminated last year was kind of a blessing for Tampa, so they could heal those injuries and come back stronger this year. So they finish in a wild card spot, and they're facing Florida for a third time in the last couple of years. The first time they faced each other was in the first round. The second time was in the second round, and now they're facing each other back in the first round. So, we're seeing the Battle of Florida fairly early on in the 2024 playoffs. So that's going to be one of the most anticipated matchups for sure. And honestly, it's going to be very tight. So we're going to dissect this series and give you guys our analysis and who we think will win this series. So Luca, the floor is yours.
So the Battle of Florida between the two Florida teams, it's going to be a hell of a playoff series. We know that these two teams don't like each other. That's first and foremost. This is going to be interesting. It's the Stanley Cup finalist of last year, taking on the Stanley Cup finalists of the teams that were the Tampa Bay Lightning, who did it 3 years in a row consecutively before that. So a Florida team has made the Stanley Cup final in, I believe, each of the last 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. So that's always something to look forward to. But I want to jump in right away with the Florida Panthers. I mean, we all know the story last year, how impressive their playoff run was after eliminating the Bruins. They beat the Leafs in 5, they beat Carolina in 4, and then they lost to Vegas. They were a fun team to watch last year. Everyone, it felt like after they beat Toronto, they were going to win it all. They ended up falling short to the Vegas Golden Knights. But this is a team that this season continued, right where they left off, essentially. Sam Reinhart with a career season, 57 goals for him, 27 of them on the power play, which is absolutely ridiculous, by the way. But 57 goals in a career year for him. Matthew Tkachuk with 88 points. He had a down year to start the year, bounced back really well at the end of the season and ended up with 88 points. Alexander Barkov, one of the best centers in the league, 80 points in 73 games. Carter Verhaeghe at 72 points as well. So just right there, those four guys, all above 70 points in the NHL. Fantastic for them. Sam Bennett, 41 points in 69 games. And then it kind of dropped off. But what made it interesting about Florida is this is a team that can score goals. This is a team that can play defense. Like, they're good in every aspect of the game, pretty much. They were 11th in the league in goals forward. They were second in the league in goals against. You look at the power play percentage, they're 23.51 on the power play. Their penalty kill percentage is 82.47. Like, they're very, very good at both ends, both on the penalty kill and on the power play. They're a fun team to watch, and they're not necessarily the best team to play against because they're physical. They're not afraid to get into a fight with you. They're a team that's very aggressive. We all saw what happened last year when Radko Gudas was in the playoffs and all the stuff against the Leafs and the stuff against the Bruins and the hits that he was throwing. Obviously, Gudas isn't there this year, but it just goes to show you that Florida is not a fun team to play against in the playoffs, and they're not afraid to bully you in order to win games. So, they've done well in that regard. And then just going into the goaltending, I mean, let's talk about it. Sergei Bobrovsky with a fantastic season this year, 36 wins, 17 losses, 4 overtime losses, 6 shutouts, .915 save percentage, 2.37 goals against average. We talked about Connor Hellebuck being in the Vezina conversation. Sergei Bobrovsky has played like a Vezina goaltender this year as well. And he's led Florida to where they are right now. And also, just to talk about it, Anthony Stolarz, who's been their backup, played 27 games this year, 16 wins, 7 losses, 2 overtime losses, a .925 save percentage for him, and 2 shutouts. So Florida have been able to get goaltending from both goaltenders, both their starter and their backup, which has allowed them to have success this season. Going on to Tampa, they've had a little bit of a different season. It hasn't necessarily been, let's say, the most promising based on their standards. I think, everyone expected Tampa to be a little bit higher. I don't think they expected them to be in the first wild card spot, but the Atlantic is very competitive. So it's not too surprising that one of these teams ended up in the wild card spot. With that being said, we're going to talk about it with the Lightning. 28.63% on the power play, 83.3% on the PK. Very good power play and penalty kill. 5th in the league in goals forward, but 22nd in the league in goals against. And that is where I believe this is going to make a huge difference this season. Obviously, Kucherov with an incredible season, 144 points, 100 assists, 44 goals. Braden Point with 90 points. Stamkos with 81. Hedman and Brandon Hagel with 75 and 76, respectively. And then we go into the goaltending, and this is where I think this series might be determined. Andrei Vasilevsky, 30 wins, 20 losses, 2 overtime losses, 900 save percentage. And Jonas Johansson, 24 games played, 12 wins, 7 losses, 5 overtime losses, 890. And Matt Tompkins, 6 games played, 3 wins, 2 losses, 1 overtime loss for 892. For me, Vasilevsky, since he came back from that hip injury, has not been the same player. He's struggled. He hasn't always been able to find his groove. I think lately he's played a lot better than recently, than the beginning of the season, but he hasn't been able to really replicate the seasons that he's had from years past. And I think that ultimately Tampa's defense hasn't been able to live up to the expectation. I know they brought in Matt Dumba during the trade deadline, but with the loss of Mikhail Sergachev, it really hurt them on the back end. And Victor Hedman, he's out right now, but he will play for the playoffs. I mean, this is a team that is not necessarily the most built defensively. They have Chernak, who's a decent defenseman. You have Darren Radish, who's not bad, but then you have Emil Lilleberg, who's had a decent season this year, but is still a rookie. Nick Perbix, again, another rookie who, doesn't really have that experience. Calvin DeHaan, who's not bad, but again, is more of a top 6 guy, and Dumba's not the same player. So you're looking at a team in Tampa that is very weak on the back end. They're good offensively. They can score goals, but they're not able to keep the puck out of the net, and they're not getting, let's say, stellar goaltending from Andrei Vasilevsky. And so going up against a team like Florida, who can score goals and who can defend and who can hit, it might be a tough series for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I'm not sure where this is going to go. I'm still trying to think about what I believe is going to happen, but I'm looking at this going, I believe Florida finally is going to beat Tampa, considering Tampa beat them twice in both head-to-head matchups that they face each other in the playoffs. I think Florida might get the edge on this one, just simply for the fact that I think they're just a more all-around team compared to Tampa.
Well, look, let's take a walk through memory lane a little bit. And the 2 times that the Florida Panthers lost to Tampa Bay, what happened those 2 years with Tampa Bay? They made it to the finals, right? So arguably, you have an up and coming Florida Panthers team that is obviously amazing this year, and proved a lot of people wrong last year. That is finally the juggernaut team that they are, where a couple years ago they were still finding their footing. They didn't have Matthew Tkachuk yet, who was like literally the missing piece of the puzzle in terms of their offense. Yes, they had Jonathan Huberdeau, but he was pretty much a no-show in terms of the playoffs, and a lot of people were not happy with his game. And you're taking that team and pinning them against arguably one of the best dynasties in the salary cap era, right? So it's normal that that they didn't fare so well against them. Now we have a declining Tampa Bay, let's say it as it is. Tampa Bay is not what they once were. They're still going to be a playoff team every single year because, Julien Bisbois, general manager of Tampa Bay, continues to make them a competitive team and always tries to make moves to make them better. But Bill Zito, arguably one of the best general managers, and has been a general manager that I've been infatuated with the last couple of years, has slowly cemented himself as one of the best general managers in the league and has built a serious contender in Florida. And taking a look at Florida, you know, when he got Brandon Montour, he was basically a nobody. People were even saying that like he was not going to pan out. He goes to Florida and he's been one of the best defensemen in the league, one of the most underrated, right? You have Gustav Forling, has one of the best plus and minus in the league last year and this year. Yes, Ekblad, has been dealing with a lot of injuries throughout his career, but he's on track to come back for game one of the playoffs versus Tampa. But even with the guys that they've added, in terms of their depth, I think they're solid. Yes, they're not the most flashiest names. Yes, you go and add Ekman Larson in the offseason to replace Gudis. Yes, I know he's not the same caliber player as Gudis, but let's be honest here. He's had a very good bounce back season. He's fit pretty well with the Florida Panthers, right? And then you look at the Tampa Bay Lightning's decor, like you were mentioning before. Sergachev not being there is crucial, and that's what puts them underneath um, Florida, and that's why Florida wins in that department when you're comparing the D, because Sergachev is their second best defenseman, hands down, behind Hedman, right? And
Yeah.
yes, I know he started skating about a month ago, but Sergachev would only be ready like deeper in the playoffs. He's not going to be ready round one of the playoffs, and if they force him to come back, I think that's just dumb, right? And you add Matt Dumba, but I think there's times where we over-evaluate him, and I think he could be considered an overrated defenseman. Nick Perbix, I think he's a very underrated defenseman alongside Chernak as well. Radish had a pretty good season, but Calvin DeHaan is nothing that this to really celebrate about. And you have Lilleberg as well, that I don't really know much in terms of his game, to be honest. He's kind of like an unknown for me personally, but I'm guessing Tampa Bay fans know a lot more about his game since they follow this team, right? So you guys could probably mention more about him in the comments section below. But in terms of the defense, for me, it's just Florida hands down that overtakes Tampa. In terms of the offense, well, again, I would have to say it goes to the Florida Panthers. This is a team that they didn't do much during the trade deadline, but adding Tarasenko at a very cheap price, has fit in perfectly into their top six. Allowing Evan Rodriguez to go back on the third line because Rodriguez was given top 6 minutes. Even Nick Cousins at one point was playing in the top six. So now they solidified their top six by adding Tarasenko, but like you said, Matthew Tkachuk started off pretty, slow, but he picked it up when he had to. Reinhardt is having a career year. Obviously, he's going to be due for a contract at the end of the year, making him a UFA. So, we'll see what happens in terms of that case. But Barkov is still solid. Verhage is one of the most underrated guys in the league. And another thing to also mention is that many of these players on this team are returning players from last year's playoff run to the finals. So they know and they have what it takes. And also, Sergei Bobrovsky this year is arguably the best goalie, probably duking it out with Connor Hellebuck this year. And they're
Yeah.
my two favorites to win the Vezina of the season. So they have the goaltending, they have the forwards, and they have the defense. Will this go to 7 games? Can Tampa's championship pedigree to in terms of whoever's still left on that team from the so-called dynasty years help Tampa push 7 games and or even potentially even win the series? I don't think so, to be honest. Kucherov is literally their best player. Yes, I know Stamkos and Point scored 40 goals this year, but there's something about their bottom six that just turns me off. I just don't think they have it. Yes, Nick Paul is very underrated and he's a guy that's interchangeable into the lineup, but Tanner Janot has been very underwhelming ever since that blockbuster trade. Connor Sherry's been okay. Austin Watson's been okay. Sorelli should be finding his way back into the lineup. Brandon Hagel is very underrated as well. They added Duclair at the deadline, but I just look at this team and I just feel that the Florida Panthers are superior. Yes, they do um they do score a lot of goals, the Tampa Bay Lightning, but they've also been conceding a lot of goals this year too. And Vasilevsky, like you mentioned, is not playing like the Vasilevsky that we know and celebrated for many years, the Stanley Cup champion winning goaltender. So in my opinion, I have to go with the Florida Panthers, probably in either 5 or 6 games.
I'm gonna say I think this is gonna go to 7. Look at some point with Tampa, like you can't really just sit there and write them off. I mean, at the end of the day, especially when you have a player of Nikita Kucherov's caliber, right? Like he can pretty much win you a game on his own. He's done it a few times this season already. But I think for me, in terms of just if you look at what happened last year with Tampa, where they lost to the Leafs in that playoff series, everyone was kind of saying, was that the end of Tampa? Like, was this going to be a situation where, now, they're not necessarily going to get back to the Cup Finals anymore? Like, are they as deep as they once were when they won those 2 cups back to back and they made it to the final that third year? And honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with maybe their time is up, in the sense where maybe they're not as good as they once were, and they don't necessarily have, let's say, the same sort of, you know, team as they once did. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's still Tampa Bay, and you still have to give them the credit where it's due. Like I said, Kucherov could win them a series on his own if he really wanted to. So it becomes an interesting situation, but I just think I like Florida more. I think they're well coached too. I like what Paul Maurice has done over there, and I think Florida is going to want vengeance. I think they're going to want to go for the cup this year. Last year, that final must have hurt them, and I think they know what it takes to get to where they need to get to. And you know what? Look, if they can play Tampa, it's going to be a hard hitting series. But if they can beat Tampa, I think that if they play Boston or Toronto next, I think they can easily handle or they can handle those two teams pretty good. So I think for Florida, it's going to be an interesting series for them. But ultimately, I think Florida is going to take it. I think they take it in 7 games. I think this goes to 7, and Florida just squeaks it out, in my opinion.
Look, I'm not counting Tampa Bay out. I'm not. This is look. It's like what you guys mentioned in the Islanders and Carolina series, right? Like even though you know the Carolina Hurricanes got swept. No, sorry, the Carolina Hurricanes swept the Islanders. Um, in one of their playoff series, you were mentioning that if you look at the games closely, it was always close, right? Last year when they faced each other, they went to 6 games. If you look at the games, it was always close. So even if this series does end in or 6 games, I still believe that Tampa Bay will be in every single game. It's not. I'm not saying that it's going to be pure domination for Florida just because they win 5 or 6 games,
Yeah,
and it's not a 7 game series. I'm not saying that. I just look at this team and they're more versatile. They have the
yeah,
better goaltending in terms of a backup and in terms of a starter this season. You look at their depth in terms of defensemen. You don't have to rely on Ekblad because you have guys like Montour, Forsling, and Ekman Larson to step up. And this dates back to the beginning of the season when they were suffering with a lot of injuries. Kachuk was out with an injury. Ekblad was out with an injury. Montour was out with an injury. And during that time, they were still a very good hockey team that was in a playoff spot. And
yeah.
when all those guys came back, okay, they got even stronger. So this team knows how to deal with the loss of key players. And that's why they're deeper. They have the depth. When Tampa Bay loses Sergachev, that hurts them a lot. If Hedman is not playing on par to what he's expected to play, their Tampa's the defense is not going to be generating any offense. They're more defensively minded, in my opinion. Whereas, Florida, they have more versatile in terms of offensive guys that also know how to play defensive structure. They're not afraid to block shots. They're not afraid
Right.
to play more defensive and stay into their zone and have better, man-to-man coverage. Tampa concedes a lot less. Just take a look at the plus and minus for Florida. They have a way better plus and minus. Look at these
Yeah.
guys, and if you look in the top 11, you could see 3 defensemen.
Yeah.
So honestly, like in my opinion, it goes to Florida. They have also forwards that are, multiple forwards that scored more than 20 goals. They have a lot of Evan Rodriguez having basically 40 points on the third line is exceptional. Sam Bennett, in the top 6 is very underrated as well. I just don't see how Florida loses this series. I'd be very surprised. Like
I agree.
Tampa is just not the team they once were, and their bottom 6 is just a bunch of guys that they cobbled together during the offseason and to try to replace past players like Alex Killorn, for example, or like Andre Palat a couple years ago since he left to New Jersey, and they've been trying to shake it up every single year in the bottom 6. The top 6 has been the same, but the bottom 6 is always being shook up every year.
Yeah.
And they're signing guys to team friendly deals like Tyler Mott, for example, right? So, or Austin Watson. So honestly, I have to go with the Florida Panthers, and also having Nick Cousins in the fourth line. I know he's a big ball buster, but he was very clutch in last year's playoff run as well, helping the Florida Panthers go to the finals. So, and you need rigged players like that to help you, and also not to mention. Not that saying that he's an X factor, but they also added Kyle Poso, who has experience as well, and he's gonna have an opportunity to win his first Stanley Cup ever. So,
Yeah.
um,
I agree.
I just see Florida Panthers is a better team, well rounded, have better depth. Like if someone's out, someone else slots in terms of their defensive positions or their forwards as well. Even in terms of goaltending, like even if one of the goaltenders go down, they have Spencer Knight as well as a third rotational option if they choose to. So Florida's is stacked in my opinion, and they proved haters wrong this year again. That despite having a lot of key players out at the beginning of the season, they were still managed to hold on to a playoff spot. So
Yeah.
it goes to Florida for me, 5 and 6 games. But is
I
there anything else
agree.
you'd like to add to the series?
No, I'm pretty good.
Perfect. But guys, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Apologies if maybe I was a little bit biased towards Florida, just that I feel very strong about this team this year and their chances of potentially going back to the Stanley Cup Finals. But again, maybe they choke and Tampa Bay ends up prevailing and pulling a reverse Florida from last year, where Florida, eliminated the juggernauts, the Boston Bruins, who were the best team in the league last year. So, anything is possible, and I'm not knocking Tampa Bay down. I clearly acknowledge, their key players and the amazing season that Nikita Kucherov had. But again, like if they shut down the top 6, I think it's gonna be very hard for the bottom 6 to prevail and help them win hockey games when I think Florida's bottom 6 is miles better than Tampa Bay's. But again, this is a Tampa Bay team that still managed to get past 90 points this year, so can't count them out. They've been to the Stanley Cup Finals 3 times in the last couple of years. But we'll see what happens. But I'm seeing another a second consecutive first round exit for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And
I agree.
so we'll see what happens. But guys, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Young Guns podcast. Thank you so much, guys, for watching.
Yes, sir.